Beginning with the recitation for the aspiration for the chitta, and then followed by engagement for the chitta. And then on page 6 is taking refuge, and the 4 immeasurable minds. So sentient beings, boundless as the sky, especially those enemies who hate me, obstructors who harm me, and those who make obstacles on my path to liberation and omniscience. May they experience happiness and be separated from suffering. I will quickly establish them in the state of the most perfect and precious Buddhahood. All Mother sentient beings, boundless as the sky, especially those enemies who hate me, obstructors who harm me, and those who create obstacles on my path to liberation and omniscience. Happiness and be separated from suffering. I will quickly establish them in the state of the most perfect and precious Buddhahood. Sentient beings, boundless as the sky, especially those enemies who hate me, obstructors who harm me, and those who create obstacles on my path to liberation and omniscience. Experience happiness and be separated from suffering. I will quickly establish them in the state of the most perfect and precious Buddhahood. Thus, until I achieve awakening, I perform virtuous deeds with body, speech, and mind. Until death, I perform virtuous deeds with body, speech, and mind. From now until this time, I perform virtuous deeds with body, speech, and mind.
Top of page 6. In the Buddha, Dharma,
and Sangha most excellent, I take refuge until awakening is reached. By the merit of generosity and other perfections, may I attain Buddhahood for the sake of all sentient beings. In the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha most excellent, I take refuge until enlightenment is reached. By the merit of generosity and other perfections, may I attain Buddhahood for the sake of all sentient beings. In the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha most excellent, I take refuge until enlightenment is reached. By the merit of generosity and other perfections, may I attain Buddhahood for the sake of all sentient beings. Mother sentient beings, boundless as the sky, have happiness and the causes of happiness. May they be liberated from suffering and the causes of suffering. May they be separated from the happiness that is free from sorrow. May they rest in equanimity, free from attachment and aversion. Mother sentient beings, boundless as the sky, have happiness and the causes of happiness. May they be liberated from suffering and the causes of suffering. May they never be separated from the happiness that is free from sorrow. May they rest in equanimity, free from attachment and aversion. May all Mother sentient beings, boundless as the sky, have happiness and the causes of happiness. May they be liberated from suffering and the causes of suffering. May they never be separated from the happiness that is free from sorrow. May they rest in equanimity, free from attachment and aversion. Durje chanjen dele naroda mamida popado jedingo kaden chunden sawe lamesha sajula ma yidam chokyama so what that so that lo yendengi domezam yen gabe dongzong la ke so me gyawa durje chang pa jedingo be shabe do takdu samge kyo ne jinji la shi tu de nigim basane kyang sim do de do pra jinji lo Jin Yujin Tanzan, Pema Geza Dumbola, Yazin Jogging Madunia, Pema Jimnation of Podo Kamba Mambo, take it just a hard to get in Jilla dishes or Guru Pema said, me Jogging Podane, Business and Jacob over Ranzencho Gongyons and Tonze Batzawela Me Shabla so. Good evening, and hope you all are having a good summer so far. So we continue in our series on the foundations of Vajrayana. This course is designed around this very common rubric used in Tibetan Buddhism, which is called the view, the meditation, and the action or conduct. This rubric of view, meditation, and conduct isn't something created in Tibet. This came from India. Tibetans inherited this way of looking at things. And it is said that using these three topics of view, meditation, and conduct, you could basically use this to ask of any spiritual traditions and say, so what is their view, right? What is their meditation, meaning like their formal practice, and conduct, which is what is like their ethics. What do they do? When you get right down to it, what do they do? So it's a useful rubric for, in a very succinct way to help us see or to focus better, to see more clearly, what are the distinctive characteristics of a particular spiritual tradition. I think it maybe, I don't know, maybe it's obvious to you, but maybe I should say that I think there is a place there is a place and there's a function in emphasizing what is distinct about something. I think sometimes, in the day and age that we're living in, and in the way that how polarized things, seem to be, not only in United States of America, in different parts of the world, it seems like how polarized things is. Our instinct, some of us might be to say, oh, let's just focus on how we're all similar, right? It's noble, it's important to recognize our common humanity. I feel that that's almost like maybe it's, duh, but apparently it's not duh. So yes, it's important for us to recognize our common humanity and appreciate, what it means to be humane. And then within that context, we should not lose sight of what is also distinctive, right? In nature, any area, any forest, any 3x3, piece of, ground that you look at, the health of that, whatever you're looking at, it's a lot stronger when you have variety. So it's about how variety is, first of all, a fact of nature. Secondly, without variety, we become weak, actually. So to look at what is distinct about something need not lead us into, therefore, becoming chauvinistic about it, like saying, oh, Buddhism is distinctive in this way, should not be then carried forward into, therefore, it is better than other isms. And likewise, now that we're looking at Vajrayana, we're not saying, or we're looking at Tibetan Buddhism, I'm not saying, therefore, it's the best. But in order to see, what is special about it, we should not fear seeing what is distinctive, what are its distinctive characteristics, and not at all making any comments about. And therefore, what about other traditions? Well, what about other traditions? Wait for another time when we're dealing with that topic, then we can see what is distinctive about that. So in fact, in the history of Tibetan Buddhism, there is a period of time that began around the 18th century where mostly in Eastern Tibet, but not exclusively, there was a rise of a movement in Eastern Tibet that eventually referred to themselves. It's a movement. It's not like a specific tradition. Yeah, it's a movement that eventually identified themselves as with the term called Rime. Rime is literally, Ri is mountains, Me is no. So it says no mountains. It's a, in Tibet, mountains, there are lots of mountains. And mountains are kind of troublesome if you have to go from place to place. So not having mountains, it's then translated less literally as non-sectarian. So this movement called non-sectarian. Now, this word non-sectarian, now Rime has kind of moved to the West as well. And among some people, they interpret Rime as like a pot of soup where you throw everything in there. And then just cook it down to like this, like we're not sure what actually was in there, Whatever left over or whatever, just throw it in there and cook it down, and then it's called Rime. For some, I would say, misinterpretation of Rime. So Rime doesn't mean, take a little bit of this, 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 and then come up with a new soup called Rime soup. Because then what you have would be a non-sectarian sect. Right? If you are like, I'm non-sectarian, you are so sectarian, then guess what? Here's the birth of, another sect. Yeah. And certainly that has happened in the history of religions. Some religions actually arose as a reaction to saying, we are not, a religion. We are not a religion. It doesn't take long before, well, there you have it, the rise of another religion. So Rime in Tibet was never understood in these terms. In fact, how did they understand Rime? First of all, I would say, they say that the actual ability to manifest this Rime spirit is somewhat limited to very capable people. They say you can have the attitude of Rime. You can have the attitude of Rime, which is a non-sectarian attitude, which is like you have equal regard for all the authentic traditions that trace themselves back to the Buddha. And even if you are personally invested in one tradition, you don't put down the other traditions. You are personally following one tradition, you see equally the value of all the other traditions, but this tradition matches your circumstances, your needs the most, so you follow that. So this is like Rime in spirit. Rime in action, it's a little harder. Because to be really Rime in action, and this is my slight criticism of how sometimes in the West, when people say, oh, I am Rime, they usually mean, what do you think they mean? I don't know if you all know enough about Tibetan Buddhism in the West. When they say Rime, usually, what do you think they mean? And I'm never going to decide. Yes. I've not decided one thing in particular. I'm never going to decide. And particularly, I'm not going to commit to studying with anyone. I would just come up with my own bowl of salad. And there's a salad bar. Why do I need, right? It may or may not work. Who am I to say that it doesn't work? Be clear too. I'm not saying it doesn't work, but I'm saying it is not what the Tibetans understood as remain. Yeah, it is not. So for those who are doing that here, it's fine. Just understand that if you think that this is what remain means in the 18th, 19th century in Tibet, you are wrong. It's never like that. In fact, just the idea of saying I'm rime means nothing unless you have a lineage. Right? I mean, how are you non-sectarian if you don't have a sect that you belong to in the first place? You need to belong somewhere before you can say, I treat everything equal. So treating everything equal doesn't mean, take a little bit here, 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 and then come up with your own meal. Well, you may or may not be able to digest this meal. This meal may or may not be good for you, And if you are not that mature, you end up with all desserts. Fun to eat, not so fun later in the night. So anyway, rime in practice, what was it like, in 19th century Tibet? Very rare, the people who could really do it. One of the famous figures of this rime movement, it was this great Lama called Petru Rinpoche. Petru Rinpoche. Petru Rinpoche, he is famous, among other things, for having popularized this one text that I already mentioned several times. Shantideva's Bodhicayavatara. Shantideva's Bodhicayavatara is an Indian Buddhist classic composed around 9th century. It's in verse, 10 chapters. And up until, as we understand it, up until 19th century, up until the time of Petru Rinpoche, that text was almost only exclusively studied in the seminaries, which meant very few people actually studied it. And it wasn't taught to the general public. But it was said that Petru Rinpoche went everywhere teaching both monastics in seminary, outside of seminary, and even general public. But he went everywhere promoting this text. And then particularly, when he taught this text, now of course from the 9th century to the 19th century, you have a millennium. Out of that millennium, at least 700 years was in Tibet. And in those 700 years, different commentaries on that text has been composed by different scholar monks of the different lineages. What Petru Rinpoche was able to do is that if a Nyingma, this is one of the lineages, if a Nyingma monastery invited him to teach this text, he would teach the text completely from a Nyingma standpoint. So that everyone who listened was like, wow, he's a great Nyingma teacher. Then when a Sakya monastery, which is another lineage, invited him to teach, he would go there and teach from a Sakya standpoint. Himself was Nyingma. Then when a Kagyu monastery invited him to teach, he would go there and teach from a Kagyu viewpoint. A Geluk viewpoint. So that if people didn't know anything about him, they just listen to him, they would think, oh, he is a great whatever. He doesn't show any bias. That's because he was able to master. And mind you, these commentaries often are criticizing other people. Especially the chapter on wisdom, the commentaries will usually kind of say, and those people are wrong this way, and those people are wrong that way, and those people are wrong that way in their interpretation. So they have no fear critiquing. So when Bajrayana was teaching, so it's almost like, so imagine if you went to his several different teachings at different monasteries. You're like, what does he believe? You know, he so convincingly taught over there about how that view is correct, that interpretation is correct, and those other interpretations are faulty in that way. And then a year later, he's teaching over there, he completely changes. That's because he's not attached, but he's clear. So he has mastered all the traditions. Even if himself, he knows his view, but it's not going to come across unless it's appropriate. Yeah? Unless, like I said, he himself is a nyingma. Then if he's teaching people who want to study with him as a nyingma, he will say, this is my view. But then if he is asked to teach among a different audience, he will teach according to that. It was that kind of non-sectarian. So for us, you know, why I tell this story, why I talk about this is not, in fact, to even talk about Rime and whether people understand it or don't understand it, is to say that we should not fear, you know, attempts to understand what is so distinctive about a particular tradition. And also we should, you know, be careful not to, you know, let's say you are sold, you know, after all these classes, say, yes, this is the best, and the rest, I don't know. That's also, and you know, not the effect that it should have. But it's rather like the ability to appreciate, you know, kind of like what is so special about this particular understanding. So anyway, foundations of Vajrayana, and as I've said, in some ways, maybe the title of this course should have been like Foundations of Tibetan Buddhism. Because I don't use the terms Vajrayana and Tibetan Buddhism like as synonyms and as interchangeable. A lot of other people do that. And again, not critiquing that, but I want to be very clear with my terms. Yeah? The term Tibetan Buddhism is a cultural, right? It denotes a particular cultural orbit. And in fact, it would include even like the Buddhism you find in Bhutan, the Buddhism you find in Mongolia, the Buddhism, so it's Tibetan in the sense that their canonical language is Tibetan. So it's their texts, just like in the ancient, you know, times, like, you know, Latin, you know, was the language of the church. So Tibetan was the canonical language of this form of Buddhism that goes all the way from outer Mongolia, inner Mongolia, to areas that, you know, Tibet, and into Sikkim, into Bhutan, you know, those areas, and even one of the stans, sorry, I forgot which one, national religion is also this tradition that we call Tibetan Buddhism. So then within Tibetan Buddhism sees itself as the practice of all three yanas, Hinayana, Mahayana, and Vajrayana. But then everything, you could say, is understood from the Vajrayana perspective. Because in this understanding of the three yanas, it's like a pyramid, where the apex is Vajrayana. And the middle body is Mahayana, the great vehicle, and the foundational is the Hinayana. So in some ways, you could say it's seen, all these other teachings is understood from the Vajrayana standpoint, and how the importance of practicing these two earlier uh, groups of practices and teachings. So we finish the view part. Now we will enter the meditation part. But here, in case you're expecting, we're not meditating. We're talking about meditation. If you want an experience of like a Vajrayana practice, which is what we're talking about when we talk about meditation, like formal practice, there's a good opportunity. Can you get a flyer? Yeah, there's a good opportunity to have a taste of it on August 4th, Sunday, from 9 to 1. It's this mini retreat called Avalokiteshvara of the Six Realms, Teachings and Practice. So Avalokiteshvara is the Buddha of compassion. The most common form of the Buddha of compassion is the four-arm form. And the four-arm form is also the form of the mantra Om Mani Padme Hum. This kind of universal mantra of compassion. Tibetans constantly, always on their lips, Om Mani Padme Hum, Mani Padme Hum. So this is on August 4th from 9 to 1. We are not live casting this practice. It's practice and some teaching, so it's kind of boring to live cast in any case. We already did that. Yeah. So that's August 4th on Sunday. Yeah, if you want to have an experience of what the practice is. So what we are doing for this class and next class and possibly the following, because we have 5 more classes left, is we are going to cover meditation and contact. So we have a handout, right, for today, and probably we'll still be using this handout for next week. So I want you to go and look at, sorry, I forgot to put the page number, but the second page, under Secret Mantrayana. We'll start there first. That is an excerpt from a longer text composed by a Nyingma master called Khenpo Pema Dorje. Khenpo Pema Dorje lived in the 19th century, 1807 to 1884, in eastern Tibet. He composed this text, which is called A Brief Overview of the 3 Turnings, which is the 3 turnings, meaning the 3 major collections of the Buddha's teachings, roughly corresponding to what we call Hinayana, Mahayana, Vajrayana. And what he does with this text is he's going to explain all these 3 turnings, and then more specifically Vajrayana, or here called Secret Mantrayana, from the standpoint of the 4 Noble Truths. So the 4 Noble Truths that the Buddha taught, the first teaching the Buddha gave to the world, formal teaching that the Buddha gave to the world after Siddhartha became Buddha, is the 4 Noble Truths. So the 4 Noble Truths is the noble truth of dukkha, or suffering, right? Then the noble truth of the origination of dukkha, the cause of dukkha. Then the noble truth of the cessation of dukkha. And then the noble truth of the method or the path to the cessation. Okay? So in this section that I extracted from this longer text, what Khenpo Pema Dorje is doing is he's explaining some of the sort of how do we understand the 4 Noble Truths on the level of Vajrayana? What's going on there? So I want you to turn to the second page of this section, the final page, and we're going to start from the very end. It says, we can see that, starting with like, if we can understand this, right? Don't worry about that. We start with, we can see that there is only a slight difference between the Pratimoksha, Bodhisattva, and Mantrayana vows. Now, these three I've mentioned before. If you were here before, you'll remember that actually, traditionally, they don't use Hinayana, Mahayana, Vajrayana so commonly. I said this is something that Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, one of the early Tibetan teachers that brought Tibetan Buddhism to the West, popularized this three vehicle way of describing the three levels. In traditional texts, they're more likely to talk about the three vows rather than the three vehicles or the three sets of vows. So the three sets, Pratimoksha, Prati is like individual. Moksha is liberation. So the individual liberation vows. So these are the vows or the practices of the Hinayana level that will free the individual. Then Bodhisattva, right? And Bodhisattva is the figure that embodies the one who vows to achieve the state of Buddha. So this is the Mahayana. And then Mantrayana is an alternate name for Vajrayana. Mantrayana, sometimes called secret mantra. Mantrayana. So it says there is only a slight difference between the Pratimoksha, Bodhisattva, and Mantrayana vows in terms of the truth of the path. And so this is the fourth noble truth. So he begins with the truth of the path, right? The fourth noble truth. So what he's saying there is, he says, is that, and we'll go back and look at that, look at it at this more detail. But here is basically saying, as far as the method to the cessation of dukkha, only slight difference, he says. And whether one practices avoidance, transformation, or taking as the path, these actually correspond to the three approaches associated with the three sets of vows. Which is, in the Pratimoksha, what is emphasized is avoid the causes of suffering. So, primarily the approach to the causes of suffering on the Hinayana level, or the Pratimoksha, the individual liberation, it's avoid creating the causes of suffering. Then, on the Mahayana level, rather than talking so much about avoiding, it talks about transforming. How to transform the causes of suffering into the causes of happiness. So Shantideva's Bodhicayavatara shows how to counteract anger, you practice what he calls patience. To counteract sloth, laziness, discouragement, you practice joyful effort. So this is transformation. Then, what is the Vajrayana approach? It's called taking as the path, which means take the afflictive emotions and turn them into the path. In the Hevajra Tantra, one of these key Vajrayana texts, it says, the very thing that binds you, right there, is what can free you. And if you do not understand that point, it says, you will forever be bound. The Hevajra Tantra, makes that statement. And that is quintessentially the secret mantra attitude, which we'll learn more about what it means there. We already looked at it a little under the view. So that which actually causes suffering, right there, that which binds you is also right there, is where you can become unbound. So an analogy is given for this. It says that on the Hinayana level, generally it is to say, over there in that patch, there are a lot of poisonous plants. So don't wander over there. Stay away from. The Mahayana is to say, yes, over there, there's a lot of poisonous plants, but among them are also medicine. And so you should not fear the poison. Right? In order to extract the medicine, and in case you get harmed by the poison, you can apply the antidote. Vajrayana says that very poisonous plant itself can be used as medicine. You don't need a second plant. You just need to know how to use that poison in order to serve as medicine. And so it gives the analogy of, it says like a Vajrayana practitioner is like a peacock. And according to Indian kind of mythology or understanding, they say that the beautiful colors of a peacock, the feather, comes from the fact that peacocks eat poisonous plants. And they turn that poison into this beautiful feathers. So it says, Vajrayana practitioner needs to be like a peacock. Now, sounds good. Not so easy to do. I think we should say that. So we should not fall into the mistake of saying, because I say I'm Vajrayana, therefore I'm like a peacock. No. It should be the other way around. When you can actually transmute the poison, then you are qualified to call yourself a Vajrayana practitioner. So I said, even though we practice Vajrayana techniques, like this next Sunday, or August 4th Sunday, it's a Vajrayana technique. But basically, we're just pretending to be practicing Vajrayana. Because we are not yet at, or at least I'm not yet, at the Vajrayana level. The founder of Drigum Kagyu, he says, the greatness of these three vows, right? So there's a lot of debates, like how do you go from one level of the vows to the second level to the third level, right? So there's lots of debates among Tibetans. Again, all these different views, right? And for each view that is advocated, the person who advocates it has a good reason, to say this or that, right? So some would even say things like, basically you move through each of those sets, meaning you graduate from the first, you don't need to worry about the first anymore. Now you go to the second, and then you go to the third. And then they would even say, the third, since Vajrayana is the highest, it trumps the other two. So if there's any contradiction, because you are a Vajrayana practitioner, you maintain the higher. And by maintaining the higher, you have covered the two lower. Kyopa Jigten Sumgon's view, the founder of the lineage that I'm part of, he says that first of all, he says all three levels of the vows, and we'll see this actually also expressed here. Not so directly, but he says all three levels of the vows, their whole point is to abandon, the whole point is to abandon the causes of suffering. to purify the afflictive emotions on the one hand. That's the abandon. And then to allow the innate Buddha qualities to unfold, to manifest. It says, no matter whether you call it Pratimoksha, Bodhisattva, or Mantrayana, the key point, they all are in agreement. Remove the adventitious stains, the innate Buddha qualities manifested. And he said, now, once you understand that, then how does your practice go? Like how do you go from individual liberation to bodhisattva to mantrayana? In fact, he says, it's not by superficially saying, oh, now I keep these vows. Now I keep these vows. Now I keep these vows. He says, it's basically, we're talking about your spiritual maturity. Your own development determines what level you are on. Not the mere, saying, oh, I have received this or I have received that. So he gave the example. He said, he didn't give. The people who wrote explanations, commentaries afterward, they said, it's like a piece of jewelry. Yeah? If it is worn by a beggar, right, then its value is on that level. The same piece, if it is worn by the king, suddenly, whoa. To give that example, to say, so depending on the wearer, right? Of course, you can sort of, kind of problematize this example, but the point is saying it's like, it depends, So when I was in Nepal recently, someone was joking. It's like they're wearing this, like they have a bead, prayer bead, mala, that looks like coral. And coral now is very expensive, very coral. But it's not a real one. And he said, well, it depends on who's wearing it. If like everyone thinks you're really wealthy, you could be wearing plastic and they will all think, oh, that's just coral, But his point, Kyoba Jitensim's point is that no, it's not about the superficial, oh, I've taken this vow, I've taken that vow. It's about how have you matured, your capacity. Have you gone beyond just focusing on yourself? Even if it is an important focus, an intelligent focus, an enlightened focus. But if you are primarily just focused on yourself, then it doesn't matter. If you have so-called received Vajrayana teachings and techniques, and you're still a Hinayana level practitioner. And the opposite, maybe it looks like you're only practicing Hinayana level meditation, but you have already evolved to the secret mantra level. Then, with or without explicit Vajrayana practices, you are a Vajrayana practitioner. So he emphasizes, kind of like, these are not designated by external things that you do, but the level of your own spiritual growth. So here it says, right, in fact, these approaches are all identical in terms of abandoning actual karma and mental afflictions, karmic afflictions and mental afflictions, purifying our habitual perception of samsara, which is the truth of suffering, and realizing the ultimate reality of the cessation of suffering. So, cessation of suffering, the truth of suffering, And then the cause of suffering is these karmic and mental afflictions, and habitual perception of samsara. So these are the causes of samsara. The last sentence doesn't really pertain to what we're talking about, so don't worry about it. Then we come back up, okay, to the beginning of this excerpt, secret mantrayana. So before we look at that, so when it comes to Vajrayana practice, what would we say? What would we say to be like the most distinctive element of Vajrayana? So right now, all the mainstream Tibetan Buddhist traditions, they will say the crucial difference between Vajrayana and non-Vajrayana is the absence or the presence of what's called empowerment. The absence or the presence of empowerment. If there is empowerment, then it's Vajrayana. If there's no empowerment, then it's not Vajrayana practice. Then what is empowerment? Empowerment is related to what's called deity yoga. And deity yoga, deity, and yoga is union with the deity. So the meditation or the practices that allow us to identify with deity, to identify with divinity. Here, deity or divinity is referring to Buddha, not ordinary deity or divinity, because in the Buddhist cosmology, you have the God realms. But all the God realms within this cosmology, they are considered still within the cycle of confusion. Now, of course, many of the gods are also very advanced practitioners of Dharma. Often, many of them more advanced than we are. Like it's said that great Brahma, like in Hindu system, Brahma is like the creator God. But according to Buddhist understanding, Vajrayana understanding, they say that Brahma is actually on the 8th level of the Bodhisattva level. So very advanced. But nonetheless, they are still within this cycle. So when we talk about deity or deity yoga as the most distinctive practice of Vajrayana, we're not talking about quote-unquote mundane divinity. We're talking about Buddhas. And so some of the most common Buddha deities is Avalokiteshvara, said to be the Buddha of compassion, Manjushri over there in this temple, the statue here holding a sword, and that's wisdom. And then, of course, the way we designed this temple and the deity principles, we wanted wisdom and compassion is said to be the two wings of the awakened state. So this represents the two practices that are the most kind of core essential. Now, of course, it's not like Avalokiteshvara is lacking in wisdom and Manjushri is lacking in compassion. If that was the case, they are not Buddhists. But it's just that their particular quality in relation to us, then it is said that somehow it's easier to cultivate compassion when we meditate on Avalokiteshvara, and it's easier to cultivate wisdom when we meditate on Manjushri. Of themselves, they are perfect Buddhas. No, absolutely no higher, no lower. Of course, Buddha Shakyamuni, the historical Buddha, also serves as a deity or deity principle. And then Tara, often called the mother of all Buddhas, the source of all Buddhas. So this is enlightenment expressed in female form. And this is also one of the side characteristics of Vajrayana, is that it's not until you get to the Vajrayana level of Buddha's teachings that you have explicitly Buddhas represented in female form. In Mahayana, you have very advanced bodhisattvas in female form, sometimes, even not that common. And then in Hinayana, no notion of Buddhas being female. In Vajrayana, you have explicitly Tara. And in fact, in Vajrayana, you go even further. Sometimes some of the deities, you're not sure if they're even human. Because they have too many heads and hands to be exactly human. Already Avalokiteshvara has 4 over there. And over here, if you get a chance during the break, you can see there's the 1,000-armed Avalokiteshvara. I sometimes joke, it's like, that sounds kind of good, except that there are some nights when I'm tossing and turning in bed, even 2 arms is too many. I don't know if you have experienced that, You turn this side, you go, God, this arm, if I can just take it off and put it somewhere, So when you're confused and suffering, 2 is too many. But when you're awake, 1,000 is very effective. And somebody has said too, like this, like sometimes it's said that he has 11 heads, like the one there. But if you look at this one, more than 11. I did not count, but I just recently realized there's more than 11 heads. Again, in a confused state, we are like that also. 1,000 arms and bazillion number of heads. Then our energy is scattered. Right? So actually this imagery of Avalokiteshvara with 1,000 arms and at least 11 heads, if not more, can simultaneously serve, right, as a symbol of how fragmented and how distracted and how confused and how pulled in all directions our lives are. Our samsaric state can also be seen in this imagery. At the same time, our nirvanic, our awakened state is also 1,000 arms and at least 11, if not more, heads. But at that time, we are no more fragmented. We are no more distracted. We are no more pulled in all directions. And that is the Vajrayana view. That the suffering that we are talking about is only appears as suffering because we are confused. But when we understand, when we're free from confusion, that energy that is experienced and manifests as suffering is revealed to be bliss. That again is how Vajrayana looks at. So this is the issue of taking as the path. It's related to that issue. So in order to practice deity yoga, it is said that it is necessary to receive empowerment. And so maybe some of you have noticed that from time to time we say, oh, we're going to have an empowerment ritual. Right? So then maybe you have even been to these empowerment rituals. I should say there are 2 senses of receiving empowerment. One is the formality of receiving empowerment, which I would say is the minimal requirement for formally beginning Vajrayana practice is to have at least go through the formality of receiving at least one empowerment, attending one empowerment with, with the attending correct motivation, not just like, oh, just curious. I'm just going to go check it out. I don't think that qualifies. It has to be like, I understand what this is about. I understand that this is like the initiation into this way of meditating and practicing. And I'm going there, not because accidentally I saw Nathan and Nathan say, hey, you want to come to the empowerment? Yeah, sure. I don't have anything until noon. Will this end at 11:45? Yeah, probably. Oh, okay, sure. No, you probably, I don't think that counts. Yeah. But not 100%, because maybe after you arrive, you're like, yes, I want to do this. Then it counts. So meaning, you have to intend. You cannot accidentally, receive an empowerment. Even the formality. So you have to say, yes, I understand this, and I want to receive this as a way to embark upon this path. Then you have to at least go through the formality of receiving the empowerment. During an empowerment ritual, basically a few things are going on. One, the person giving the empowerment is connecting you to what we call the lineage blessings. It's like plugging you into the flow of the blessings, so that you join that, so that you are now empowered, like the word says. But the deeper explanation, they say, actually, it's not like you didn't have it before. It's just what's already innately there, some kind of ripening is affected in the context of an empowerment. Secondly, you are introduced to this deity principle through the empowerment. So the deity principle of Avalokiteshvara, which is compassion, the deity principle of Manjushri, which is wisdom, the deity principle of Tara, which is protection and swift activity, they are introduced to you formally. And moreover, how you are going to practice experiencing yourself as Avalokiteshvara, or experiencing yourself as Manjushri, or experiencing yourself as Tara, is also introduced and taught during the empowerment. The formality. But then there is a deeper meaning of empowerment, and that doesn't occur so easily. The deeper meaning of empowerment is actually, in fact, coming face to face, they say, poetically, coming face to face with the deity, actually meeting the deity. That probably, for most of us, will not happen the first time you walk into an empowerment, even intentionally with all sorts of preparation. That will take some time. And that is when you come across certain description in the text that says, the moment you receive empowerment, Buddhahood is achieved. Right? So they cannot be talking about the formality of empowerment. In fact, you begin with the formality of an empowerment, then you practice. According to the instructions you receive at the empowerment, you practice and you practice and you practice and you practice. And then finally, you will be empowered directly by the deity, which is when you finally realize your own nature as Avalokiteshvara, your own nature as Manjushri. That is when you have finally received that kind of empowerment that it says, right, upon receiving empowerment, you become Buddha. So that's the ultimate empowerment, so to say. But it is true that it is necessary for Vajrayana that you have to go through the formality of having received the empowerment. Because also there, you basically then join a community of Vajrayana practitioners, that you're connected. This is not a Lone Ranger thing. You have to be kind of plugged into a community, and then the support of the Vajra community in order to actualize, in order to effectively practice. Then, of course, the person who gives that empowerment plays the role of the teacher, which is in Tibetan, it's called the Lama. The Lama. In Sanskrit, is called Guru. Guru, the etymology of the Sanskrit, the Indian word guru, is heavy. And in Tibetan commentaries, they say heavy laden with qualities. Someone who is full of qualities. So what qualities? Qualities of knowledge and qualities of pure intention. Those are the two most important qualities. So meaning, for someone to effectively serve as a mentor, a guru, a Vajrayana guru especially, because of course guru or mentor, there are so many levels too, right? And again, remember the point about whatever level is not really about what certificate they have, right? It's about their own level of realization and your level of relating to them. You know, if you don't have that level of maturity yet, you could be living, you know, in the same house with a qualified Vajrayana guru, but you will not relate. You will not be able to relate to this person as a Vajrayana guru. So this guru or this lama or this teacher needs to have at least two qualities. One, they have to know more than you. The quality of knowledge. Otherwise, it's not going to work. Right? Secondly, they need to have the quality of kindness in the sense of caring about your ultimate kind of destination. See, kindness is a word that is easily misunderstood. Sometimes we think, oh, that means, you know, kind of being sweet and encouraging you all the time. Kindness comes in many, many forms. Remember the wrathful Buddhas, you know. In graduate school, my graduate advisor will always, from time to time, he'll say to us, he said, don't forget that Manjushri comes with a sword. You know, it's a sword. And swords, you know, cuts. You know, he might look, you know, kind of gentle. And in fact, his name, you know, Manjugosha, means the sweet voiced one. Voice. Gosha, voice. The one who is very sweet with his voice. Very pleasant, you know. So then my advisor would say, but he also, you know, wields a sword. You know, watch out for your head. So kindness, we're not talking about just being sweet and just being, you know, kind of motherly in the sweet way, you know, but a fierce mother. In other words, whatever necessary in order to really take care of this person for the long haul. So that person, that guru, needs to have these two things. So we'll take a break now. When we come back, we'll look at, you know, this guru principle, because that's like the beginning of Vajrayana practice. It's a difficult topic, but you cannot avoid it
you're interested in Vajrayana. It's not a hungry ghost. It's our new water heater. Sounds like a ghost crying. Oh, thank you. Oh, yes. What a lamp. Oh. Oh, sure. Thank you. Easy enough. Candles, thank you.
This is from Jim.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Or a snap.
I'm good, thank you.
There's not. The dates are usual back there.
Maybe,
Million orange or hand wash.
maybe. Surprise me.
Okay.
You know what I can and cannot
Okay.
do. Man. Yeah. Can you put this in there? Yeah, that's what it is. Yeah. 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 Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh, you should tell Edwina that you have brought stuff because she's going to get stuff.
It was all
Yeah, but this is
wrapped
good.
up.
This is good.
It was all wrapped up.
This I can. Thank you. Her.
Because some really like to meet with me, but it
Uh-huh.
doesn't have to be right away.
Okay.
And,
Well, right away is more likely to happen.
oh, really? Okay. Well, the last time I asked you, you
What?
said they were quite good.
Yeah, so like this coming week, tell me some of your good times. I can tell you. Yeah. Oh.
I
Nathan. Nathan. Maybe unplug that so that it's not.
So I would like to start by just giving some time for you to ask some questions. I'm sure you have questions. I will try to answer the questions, and yeah, sure. Until the Vajrayana level, yeah, there just isn't. You know, yeah, yeah. I mean, it's just how it evolved. You don't have until you get to the Vajrayana level that they become more explicit. The idea of like the universality of Buddhahood turns up in the Mahayana. In the Hinayana, achieving Buddha is said to be very rare. Yeah? And so reflecting kind of cultural constructions of gender and gender equality are not equal, then it's like, if it's so rare, and then because the historical Buddha was a man, right? So on that level, they thought of, well, if it is so rare and our only point of reference is a man, then yeah, Buddha is a male, right? On that level. But when we arrive at the Mahayana level, then it's said that Buddha state, the attainment of Buddha, equally applies to everyone. But it's not until Vajrayana where that's like, well, if that's the case, of course there are female Buddhas, like taken to its logical conclusion. Yeah. So it's an evolution of like core like ideas, you know. Now, for us then, I think then that's another thing you can say, well, one of the distinctive things about Vajrayana is like it offers, you know, a model of. Now, again, I should say this, you know, and I don't know if you're going to like hearing this or not, but ultimately it's to transcend any notions of male, female, or anything. And so therefore, some of the deities like have, you know, human face and then like a pig face like sticking out from the right. And the commentary says, obviously, we're not saying that literally there is such an entity walking around. But this pig face sticking out from the human face is to cut your notions of clean and unclean. Because in Indian culture, pigs are considered very dirty. Yeah, so now there's a Buddha with like a female human face with a pig face on the side. Is to cut through. Yeah. Not just like in other spiritual traditions, you know. In Christianity, it said, you know, in Christ there's no male or female. But then, of course, you know, in the reality of the hierarchy of the church and all of that, and in that sense, in Buddhism, yeah, you know. It has, you know, human beings acting out their limitations. Yes. Uh-huh.
First is physically attitude towards living emotions, loss, and so forth. Are we safe to assume that most of the iconic being that that's Buddha or deity and consort?
Uh-huh.
Some of the opposite sex, that's Vajrayana.
Yes. Yes. So any deity, any Buddha figure that has male and female in union, 100% that is Vajrayana. And in fact, even within Vajrayana, there are 4 levels. It is said that there's no deities in union in the first 2 levels. It's like at more advanced level, you have more explicit. And there it's basically what is taboo in the lower levels becomes. Right? And that's to make that point, that basic point that we already made. Take it onto the path. Don't shun anything. Right? But it's also not saying, of course, feed you know, all your confusion. But basically, don't shun anything. If you have the technique
if you have the understanding, if you have the wisdom, whatever unworkable situation, whatever unworkable condition, ordinarily can turn into something that will enhance your development. A very bold attitude in the Vajrayana. Well,
The other question I had is about remand.
mm-hmm,
You had the section where it had a weeks ago, where it had 108 paperwork for one of the
mm-hmm,
and one of them said to accept ordinances
mm-hmm,
as a gateway for what
mm-hmm.
is that related to remand?
Yeah, you could always read it as that way, but there's so many ways to read that. Yeah. But the Rime movement, I don't know if they explicitly refer to that. Yeah. Other questions so far? Mm-hmm. Yes. So the question is that in what way Buddhas transcend gender, in the sense that, in fact, what makes a Buddha is not male or female or even human or non-human. That these are merely the way they appear to be based on who is looking. That in fact, the Buddha state is not limited. Now, for all the other levels before, it was limited to male. You have to appreciate that fact that, that it was limited to male until you get to the Vajrayana level. Suddenly they say, no, it's not limited to male. But the point there is not that it's male or female, it's that it's male, it's female, and it's the third sex, and it's the fourth, and it is none of the above. And so transcending also in the sense of it's irrelevant. Now, I think that, for me, I would say that it is irrelevant should not, that on the ultimate level is irrelevant, should not be used as an excuse here to say, oh, it's irrelevant. Because I've seen like Buddhist communities resisting changes, in say the way things are done, they're like, oh, well, the tradition is always like this, so get over this whole gender thing. Say, there are some problems that we need to work through, on the relative level. You cannot just say, ultimately it's irrelevant. Well, we're not living on the ultimate level, we're living on the relative level. And on the relative level, things are stacked against one gender. Let's try to fix that, personal opinion. Why I stand on this. Sometimes I fear like ultimate level language being misused to justify things on the relative level. Now, this first turn to the very first page. The title of this song is a song that incorporates the four mindfulnesses from an instruction on the view of the middle way. The wording of this song is by the 7th Dalai Lama. But according to the 7th Dalai Lama, the content of this song was communicated from Manjushri, the Buddha of wisdom, to the founder of the lineage that the Dalai Lamas come from, which is the Gelugpa lineage. Of the four main lineages of Tibetan Buddhism, Gelugpa is the most recent. In some ways, it's a combination of earlier traditions, the Gelugpa, but they have gained their own identity now. So all the Dalai Lamas come from the Gelugpa. And the Gelugpa lineage was founded by Rinpoche Lama Tsongkhapa. So according to the seventh Dalai Lama, the founder, Rinpoche, received the content of this song from the Buddha of wisdom, and that it was passed down orally, not written, from generation to generation until the seventh Dalai Lama kind of put it into words. And the four mindfulnesses here, if you are familiar with like mindfulness, it's not the four mindfulness that you find in other Buddhist traditions. In other Buddhist traditions, in general Buddhist traditions, including Tibetan Buddhism, there is a set of four frames, four contexts for cultivating mindfulness. But here, the four mindfulness, clearly it is using a familiar term, but giving different content to it. So what are the four topics that you should be mindful of as a Vajrayana practitioner? First one is the Guru, the spiritual guide on the Vajrayana level. That's the first thing that Manjushri, Buddha of Wisdom, said. You should always remember the Guru. Second, mindfulness is a very fancy word, but another English word is remember. I mean, literally, it's to remember. Second, to remember is the second to remember is bodhicitta, the altruistic mind, which we already looked at during the view. Yeah. The third to remember is deity, your own body as deity is the third. And the fourth to remember is emptiness. So these are the four mindfulnesses. In terms of these verses here, first one is remembering the Guru, mindful of the Guru, by remaining in a state of devotion. You see the end of that? Yeah. Then the second one, bodhicitta. Mindful of remembering bodhicitta, remain in a state of compassion. Okay. The third one is your body as deity, your true identity as Buddha, and remain in a state of profound clarity about that point. So each of them has an object, right? What you're mindful of, but also how to be mindful of. The first one, through devotion. Second one, first one, through devotion, the object, the Guru. Second, through compassion, and the object, bodhicitta. Third, through profound clarity. Clarity about what? Clarity that you are Buddha. Then the fourth one is the last two verses. There are two, unlike the first three. First, remain in a state of dharmata, and second, you turn the page, remain in a state of appearance and emptiness. So, according to Manjushri, the Buddha of wisdom, communicating to Lama Tsongkhapa, and then turned into a song here by the seventh Dalai Lama, these are the 4 points you have to remember for practicing Vajrayana. If you distill all the practices, it's down to these 4 things. In in the Drikung lineage, the lineage that I'm from, we talk about 5 points. Yeah, 5 points. The first point is bodhicitta. Second point is yourself as deity, as Buddha, to practice that. Third, devotion to the Guru. Fourth, you can say is the equivalent of this emptiness mentioned here. But we call it the nature of reality. And fifth, so basically what's here, rearrange. But we have a fifth one that is not explicitly mentioned here. Of course, the seventh Dalai Lama would not disagree. The fifth one is what we call dedication. Like these are the 5 core practices, we say. If you want to successfully practice Vajrayana, all your Vajrayana practices needs to have these 5. So we have already started talking about the Guru. Now let's look at the first verse. Upon a seat of the unchanging union of method and wisdom. Method is a technical word that also means compassion. Here method is method to aid others. Method to liberate others. And including methods to liberate ourselves. So that's about compassion. So method and compassion in Buddhist writings, they are used as, basically synonyms. Upon a seat of the unchanging union of method and wisdom. So in other words, right, wisdom and Manjushri, method of compassion, Avalokiteshvara. So that is said to be, what is the state of Buddha? The state of Buddha is the perfection of wisdom and compassion. But now, here it said, upon a seat of the unchanging union of method and wisdom, sits the gracious Guru, the embodiment of all sources of refuge. A Buddha perfect in abandonment and realization, right there. Abandonment, what do you abandon? Margin. Afflictive emotions. And realization, what do you realize? The Buddha qualities. Remember, when we talk about Buddha, abandonment and realization are these 2 things. One is to abandon or to purify all afflictive emotions. 2 is to realize or to manifest all the Buddha qualities. In fact, the Tibetan word for what we translate as Buddha, is not literally, when the Tibetans translated the Sanskrit word Buddha, it's not literally Buddha. They chose a word in Tibetan is Sangye. Sangye has 2 parts to it. Sang is to cleanse, is to remove, is to take away, is to dissipate. What do you dissipate? What do you remove? What do you cleanse? Afflictive emotions. Kleshas. Gepa is to expand. What is being expanded? The Buddha qualities are expanded, pushing away the darkness. So actually, every time Tibetans say Sangye, it's, if you want to translate that literally, instead of translating that as Buddha, it should be dissipating, expanding. So they give an interpretive translation. What is Buddha? Buddha is the one who has dissipated all afflictive emotions and expanded all Buddha qualities. Yeah. So here it says, The guru is a Buddha, perfect in abandonment and realization right there. So, as a visual image, you are to see the guru seated like Buddha Shakyamuni, for example, over there in that painting, seated. And what he is seated on is method and wisdom. In visualization practice, in deity practice, this is represented by basically, you could say, two cushions called sun and moon. Sun is wisdom, moon is compassion. And so they are red and white respectively. And it's like a double layered round cushion. White called the moon seat or moon disc, and then the sun disc on top. Then seated on that is the guru. And this is all very symbolic and evocative. That the guru is sitting on the sun and the moon, and the sun and the moon is wisdom and compassion. Later on, when you learn more about Vajrayana, it has further levels of meaning, this red and white sun and moon. And then seated there is your guru, to be seen as a Buddha. Then he tells you, how do you relate to this guru? He says, abandoning all critical ideas, supplicate him or her. In Tibetan, there's no gender. So to translate, the translator has chosen him or her. The noun doesn't have gender. Abandoning all critical ideas, supplicate the guru with pure perception, without allowing the mind to wander. Remain in the state of devotion, without losing mindfulness, without forgetting, always remembering. Remain in a state of devotion. What do you think this section is saying? These last 3 lines. Your thoughts. Well, what do you think? What?
It's an instruction.
Yeah, it's an instruction. Yeah, but how do you feel about the instruction?
What I hope for it to is that the Buddha, or the guru position is not something that you aspire to. I want to sit in that chair.
Oh yeah, right.
But that if you are realizing that that union of method and wisdom,
Right.
then it will be there.
Sure. So there's a question of like, who is the guru, right? But then here, that line, abandoning all critical ideas, supplicate him or her with pure perception. Supplicate is an archaic word. It can literally just mean pray. Call out to him or her with pure perception. Oh, for sure.
But if you see it the other way,
Yeah.
it can break down that hierarchy.
It can also break down, yes. And hierarchy is assumed, right? They are awake, we're confused. That's the basic hierarchy, yeah. But I know what you mean. What you're talking about is that how human beings how human beings can pervert this into, and human beings, embedded in economic systems, in political structures, yada, 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 yada. For sure, yes. But, as I said, like, as problematic as all of that is, I still cannot change the Vajrayana teachings to say, oh, actually, it doesn't matter. You don't need the guru, Then that's not Vajrayana, So here it says, abandoning all critical ideas, supplicate him or her with pure perception. What's going on there? Yeah. So that means, right, it assumes that you will have all sorts of critical judgments about this person, right? But it says abandon that. Yeah? And instead do what? Look to this person with pure perception. What does that mean? What does that mean?
Either means that you idolize them or you see their actions as a emanation of their, from what you can see them improving themselves on the basis of
Uh-huh.
and yourself.
And why do you need to see the guru with pure perception? Because he is a Buddha.
Because he's another person.
Sure, yeah, he's the one that, but more essentially, why do you have to see the guru as Buddha? That's the meaning of pure perception. So perceive the guru as Buddha. Why? And that's based on what? Because the most fundamental point is every being is Buddha. Why do we not experience every being as Buddha, including certain people at certain places, whoever you think they might be? Because we don't see it. So my teacher said, that you cannot see other people as pure is not their fault. That you cannot see other people as pure, that you cannot see other people as Buddha, is because of your perception. So it's said that all beings without exception are Buddhas. Now, so that's like the principle behind this. Now, if the goal is to see all beings as Buddha, in the Vajrayana it says, now who told you that? Who told you that? That all beings are Buddhas? Who told you that? The Guru. Right? And if the Guru is the one that tells you that, then you have to at least be able to see the Guru as Buddha. Now, it helps tremendously if this Guru would just behave like a Buddha. I mean, they don't say this, but also footnote, hey, by the way, gurus, please behave yourselves. That's the problem, They don't behave themselves sometimes. But sometimes, even if they behave themselves, if you, the perceiver, don't stop looking for faults, then it doesn't matter, they say. Even if Shakyamuni was alive today, you'd be like, the accent is hard to understand. So, first, you have to really understand, Yes, I certainly, I'm quite aware of like all the tribulations and all how treacherous this can be, how dangerous. And that's why, in a way, historically, it is said that Vajrayana is not for everyone. You take great risks because you are opening up the possibility to be abused. Not that you should be, but it comes with that element, right? If you meet a charlatan, or more frequently is you meet someone who is well-meaning, then somewhere along the way, they got lost. And then you have invested too much in this whole project, and you can't even admit that everyone is now in a mess. Right? But there's no guarantee. I don't know if we can legislate, guru-disciple relationship. Buddhist centers should have, code of conduct and all of that, because this is what do you call it? This is a society where everyone is suing everyone, right? So litigious, right? That's the word. This is a litigious society, and beyond that, to also set clear boundaries. I think Dharma centers should do that. But this is not, in my opinion, to be confused with that you can have an authentic guru-student relationship if your reference point is always to, well, in section 4 of the code for the center, 4.2, it says, it's not going to work, okay? This is not, you don't have a Vajrayana guru if you're operating from there. So I'm an advocate for like organizations protecting people, having clear boundaries, all of that is important. But that cannot take away from what this is about. What this is about is, yes, there's an element of risk. Yeah. And here, the other thing too, it says, if we are to perceive the guru as pure, like when Khenpo Nima was here, the visiting teacher, he said, yeah, we also say, so please don't do anything funny, It makes it harder for us to use you. Basically, that's what's going on. You're using this person to train your perception of everything. So that this person is the beginning point, not the end point. That's the other problem. I can say, like, Buddhism, like in a place like Tibet, it's like religion as usual, right? So you don't have like a self-selected group with certain types of issues turning up looking for guru. In other words, you have a whole range of issues coming and looking for a guru. Back in the old country. Here in the West, there is a disproportionate, and not just West, wherever this tradition is new. It could even be some other place in Asia, or Africa, or Europe, or South America. Yeah, you have a disproportionate aggregation of people having come from like relationship problems, whether it's with a parent or with a partner, and coming there hoping that Buddhism is going to fix that. And then especially if they meet a tradition that emphasizes this guru figure, it can compound. Under the hands of a really skillful, two things, right? Knowledgeable as in skillful, and pure, concerned guru, they can really work with someone, even if that person is projecting, that the guru is the lover, or the guru is the father, or the guru is the mother that you never had, or whatever, right? Under a real good guru, they can really change that and help, and turn something amazing. But you can see how treacherous it can be. But again, because it is treacherous, we cannot say, oh, well, let's see, how do we change Vajrayana? You cannot. You just have to approach it more carefully. Yes?
Is there anything in the expression that changes the
Uh-huh. Yes. Oh, yes, of course. Yeah, in the guru's manual, so to say, it tells you, these are all your responsibilities,
And is there any way that that so on the practitioner in a way that is non-critical of that, but that it holds that
Yeah. Yeah, it's an interdependent thing. You know, it's an interdependent thing. The student can destroy the teacher as much as the teacher can destroy the student. And so again, it's a very risky. You're opening up, right? Because like on the Hinayana level, you relate to a teacher as just someone that gives you good advice. That's it. You don't see much of them, right? In the Mahayana level, it's said that they're all sort of like a friend. Yeah. Then in the Vajrayana level, a contemporary teacher says, the Vajrayana guru is an assassin that you hire to take you out. You know, it's like, I don't know, you know. Now, of course, you know, like those of us who are kind of like, oh, I like that, you know, you're like, oh, that's great, you know, until they start going after you, you know, then you're like, ah. Then when they go after you, you're not sure, wait, does he turn evil or he's actually doing what he's supposed to do, or she for that matter? You can't really tell. So here it is said, you don't need to rush into this. So the tradition says, you know, you analyze this person, you know, and let it be a more natural process. And always keeping the bigger point in mind. Like the whole point of even looking for someone to relate to as a guru on the Vajrayana level is so that you can see everybody else as Buddha. You see? But so often you will see like dysfunctional, like, you know, situations where everyone in this community is competing for the guru's attention. And everyone's, you know, like stepping on each other to get to the guru. So like only the guru is Buddha. You, who cares? Then that's ridiculous. Doesn't work like that. So when it says abandoning all critical ideas, there I think we have to be careful. I would emphasize, it doesn't mean that you like, you know, push away when you see some funny things going on, push away, you know. It's not going to work. I think you should, if you see some funny things going on, you know, you should like, I don't know, you know. And then always also say to yourself, like, I have limited view of the whole picture. Yeah. And try to find out if it is important. Now, the Tibetans also have a saying, they're like, when the snow lion, which is this mythic creature that lives in the snow mountains, it says that when the snow lion frequents the village too often, but when if the snow lion comes in the village too frequently, he will be mistaken as a dog. He'll be mistaken as a dog. So that's also saying to the gurus, don't be so familiar with your students. And in fact, that's also true. You know. And especially, I think, in this culture, everyone wants to be a friend. Because we value like equal, horizontal, you know, relationship. And that's a lot to be said about that. But then if you really need a Vajrayana guru, you have to accept the hierarchy. There's no choice. If you are going to be friends, it's not going to work. Yeah, it's not going to work. It's not easy. It's not easy for the student, it's not easy for the teacher. I've said, you know, like, So here is saying the student, right, should have pure perception of the teacher. What about the teacher? The teacher needs to have pure perception of the students. Right? And if an individual does not know how to have pure perception of students, then he or she should not operate, should not serve as a Vajrayana guru. Because things can go very wrong. And if you think a student having pure perception of the teacher is difficult, it's twice as difficult for a teacher to have pure perception of the students. Because, see, the student only needs to project all sorts of good things on the teacher so that the student could say, oh, I also want to be good like that, right? But the part of the teacher's job is to see what is wrong with the student. But you simultaneously have to have pure perception of them and still be able to call them out. So I can tell you, I have not figured that out. How do you do that? Or not so skillfully. Got to be very careful, Very hard. But because it is hard, because there are scandals, because there have been, people that have been harmed, all of that, at the same time, I have to say, if you ask me, but you cannot change. You cannot improve on what the Buddha taught. The fact that there are problems, already the tradition already says, this is when you get to Vajrayana, it's not so easy. Be careful. Now, as a practical thing, then you say, well, now I'm interested in Vajrayana, what should I do? And you just said you have not figured out how to be a teacher in this way. So then you're like, now what do I do? Right? Then my answer would be, you don't need to look at me as that guru. But you need to have the concept that there is a guru. There is this principle of the guru that you can look to. And for that now, Buddha Shakyamuni as that to reflect back to you what the, as you say, unchanging union of method and wisdom. If you have enough confidence in Buddha Shakyamuni or Tara or whoever you relate to, and don't keep it too abstract and say, and also there are human beings who have that. And whether it's me or somebody else that you say, well, I would like to think that he is, but right now, I don't know. But that don't know, when you say that, you cannot say it simply on, so when is he going to become a Buddha? Then it's never going to happen. You have to say, I need to work on me cleaning my lenses as much as he needs to, or he or she needs to abandon the afflictive emotions, right? And realize all the Buddha qualities. So it's interdependent. So my point is, no, you can start Vajrayana practice, but practice it maybe on a Mahayana level, or maybe even Hinayana level. But ideally, at least on the Mahayana level, which is this altruistic, like, I'm practicing this for the greater good. Then you can practice Vajrayana methods. Because through practicing those methods, you will purify your perception. And if the teacher is equally serious about making a difference, he or she will, abandon more and more of the afflictive emotions. Then it will make it easier for you. And one of these days, you will go, oh yes, this is my teacher. And that is basically how I found my teachers. Not by going, oh, will you be my teacher? But just practice the Dharma, learn from the person, And then after 10, 15, 20 years, like, oh, this is the teacher. Then you won't get in trouble. But if you frantically, 1-800 guru, I can guarantee you, you're going to run into problems. Okay, it's 9:09. So at the very end, the practice of dedication. So we don't need to recite anything because sometimes it turns into just saying words. So take a few moments, even if it's just a few seconds, reflecting on that the purpose that we are here, even if we came here thinking just for ourselves, try to expand the concern for the benefit and for the good of all. And then thinking whatever good that has arisen during the course of this last couple of hours, may that good, may that power be dedicated to the freedom of suffering and the attainment of the Buddha state of all beings without exception. So think a few moments of that, and in that way we dedicate the merit, we dedicate the virtue that we have collectively multiplied by spending the last couple of hours learning about Vajrayana. Okay, thank you for coming. See you all next week. There's open Sangha tomorrow.